The following work is brought to you by ScriptCrib. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon for more information on our works. And as always, if you want to know more about what we're doing and be up to date when we release it, always like and subscribe. Philip was unable to open his eyes. His muscles were tense and his body felt remarkably heavy. "I'm telling you, this is the man that we need," said the soft, angelic voice from afar. There was silence as he laid on the table. The sounds of the people around him were as soothing as they were menacing. As Philip slowly came to, he began to feel a dull throbbing in his head. The last thing he remembered was walking home from breakfast and suddenly being attacked from behind. His car wouldn't start, but it didn't matter. He had the best night of his life and even had a great breakfast to go with it. "My name is Andrea Scarlett," she said once inside his car. "I go by my last name in the club because I think it's a bit more sultry and seductive." Philip smiled and closed the door once she was inside. He walked around and opened his before stepping in and sitting behind the wheel. "And might I ask who Declan is, Philip?" inquired Andrea. Philip placed his hands on the wheel and hung his head solemnly. "Declan Bartholomew is my alias, and who I truly wish I could be. Last night, I felt like I was finally him." Andrea smirked and shook her head. "I think Philip Cassidy did just fine," she affirmed quietly. He tried to move his limbs, but found that he was bound to the table with restraints. Panic began to set in as he realized he was completely helpless. Suddenly, he heard footsteps echoing in the distance, getting closer and closer. The soft voice from earlier spoke up once again. "Don't be afraid, Philip. You're in good hands now." As the footsteps grew louder, Philip could see a figure approaching. It was a tall, blonde-haired woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to stare straight through him. The woman approached him slowly and began to examine his face closely. Philip tried to speak, but found that his throat was dry and scratchy. "What do you want from me?" he croaked. The woman simply smiled and stroked his cheek gently. "Philip, we need your help, and I think you might be the person who can finally aid us in our endeavors." Behind him, a familiar voice chimed in. "Beatrice, do not talk in hyperbole. He's been through enough and it's only going to get worse for him." Philip turned his head slightly to see Andrea Scarlett approaching from the side. However, instead of in the clothes she wore, and removed, at the club, or the hoodie and jeans she was in at breakfast, she was now clad in clothing that appeared as if it came from one of the many computer games he played. Her long, sandy brown hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she wore a black bodysuit with silver armor plating on her shoulders and legs. She looked like a video game character come to life. Beatrice rolled her eyes in response to Andrea's comment. "He needs to know the gravity of the situation, Andrea. We're asking him to save the world." Philip's eyes widened in shock. He was still unable to move his limbs, though his back was beginning to become more and more uncomfortable. "Save the world? What are you talking about?" inquired Philip. Beatrice leaned in closer, her eyes locked onto his. "There's a new threat emerging, Philip. An ancient evil that's been dormant for centuries is waking up, and it wants to destroy everything we hold dear. We need someone with your skills to help us stop it." Philip's mind raced as he tried to process everything that was being thrown at him. "I don't have any skills," he said softly. "I can barely get out of bed every day without my knees buckling from the weight of my own existence." In that statement, Philip was realizing just how meaningless and drab his existence was. It is sad that self-awareness is one of the first steps toward repairing a problem. Philip would require a great deal more steps, though. Beatrice turned to Andrea and shifted her eyes in confusion. "This has to be a joke, Andrea. Surely you made a mistake." Beatrice paused as Andrea darted her eyes over to the helpless Philip. "You were sent to get a noble warrior, not some bookish buffoon." Andrea placed her hand on Philip's shoulder and kept her eyes locked on Beatrice. "Listen to me. How many times have I been sent to grab the strongest, bravest, boldest person I could find, only for them to end up dead on the first job?" Philip's eyes perked up in cowardice. "Dead on the first job?" he screamed. Andrea nodded solemnly. "Yes, dead on the first job," she said, her voice low and serious. "We need someone who is intelligent, resourceful, and quick-thinking. We need someone like you, Philip." Philip's heart was pounding in his chest as he tried to wrap his head around all of this. He had always dreamed of being a hero, but he never thought it would actually happen. What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Andrea leaned in closer, her eyes gleaming with determination. "You have to come with us and face the ancient evil that's threatening to destroy everything we know and love." Philip swallowed hard, his mind racing with uncertainty. "But why me?" he asked, his voice trembling with fear. "Because you have something that the other heroes we've sent before didn't have," Andrea said, her eyes shining with hope. "You have heart, Philip. You have a strong will and a determination to do what's right, even if it scares you." Philip's heart swelled with pride at her words, but he still had doubts. What if I fail? He asked, his eyes drifting down toward the side of the table and away from Andrea. Oh, certain death awaits if you fail, inserted Beatrice. Failure means you're dead, just like everyone else that has helped us. Andrea patted Philip on the shoulder softly. But it doesn't matter, Philip, because you're not going to die. You're going to live. You're going to live forever. At least until you're dead, inserted Beatrice. I know this realm is new to you, but you are not immortal. We all die at some point. Whether battle, old age, the pox, something will eventually kill you. Rabid fowl is even something we have to worry about here. Philip turned his head and glanced up at the ceiling. The pox? He asked harshly. What in the hell is the pox? Oh, he's never heard of the pox? Inquired Beatrice inquisitively. Oh, it's quite nasty, really. Kills you from the inside out. Rots out your intestines and make you shit yourself for days. Really nasty way to go. Andrea sighed loudly. He doesn't need to know about what diseases we have here, Beatrice, she remarked harshly. Everyone needs to be aware of the pox, Andrea. It's a real threat and one that the people must be wary of, countered Beatrice. I don't wish the pox on my worst enemy. Andrea's voice was no longer soothing to Philip. His mind was thinking of all the evils that she had mentioned. Wait, rabid fowl? Like angry chicken? Beatrice nodded emphatically. If they ambush you, they'll peck you to death. You have to take very special care around them. Philip's body had yet to leave the table, but he was already wishing he was gone. Andrea sighed loudly at Beatrice. Her droning on about the pox and rabid fowl was not helping any matters as Philip's heart began to race. The pox is the least of his worries right now, Beatrice, and the idea of him coming across rabid fowl is remarkably slim. He needs to worry about the shadows. Andrea turned away from Beatrice and locked eyes with Philip, immediately noticing the fear in Philip's eyes. Don't worry, Philip. Beatrice is just trying to scare you. The shadows are a real threat, but one that we will prepare you for. They are just a part of this realm, just like the rats I saw roaming the alleys in yours. As for the rabid fowl, we can show you how to avoid them. They mostly come out at night and are attracted to light sources, so we can make sure to keep our torches low and not attract them. Philip felt a sense of relief wash over him as Andrea spoke. He realized that he was still new to this realm and had much to learn. He didn't know where he was, nor how he truly got there, but he at least had someone there he felt connected to. Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate your guidance, he said with a smile. Beatrice rolled her eyes at the display of weakness from Philip. Fine, don't listen to me, but when the pox comes for you, don't say I didn't warn you. Andrea shot Beatrice a warning look before turning back to Philip. Now, I'm sure you'd like to know more about where you are and probably why you're stuck to this table. Philip pursed his lips together and exhaled slowly. I would like that, he said softly. It's a bit unnerving right now, and to be honest, I feel like I died and I'm in hell. Beatrice laughed and turned away from the table, leaving Andrea with her hand still on his shoulder. Andrea composed herself while Philip darted his eyes back and forth, unnerved by her response. Oh, please, Andrea, just tell him. Andrea took a deep breath before starting. Philip, you are not in hell. You have been transported to a different realm, one that is very different from the world you know. This realm is called Turas, and it's a place where magic rules and anything is possible. Philip's eyes widened in disbelief. Magic? Are you saying that magic is real? Andrea nodded. Yes, in this realm magic is very real. It's what makes everything here possible. But magic can also be dangerous, so it's important that you learn how to control it. Philip tried to sit up, but found that he was still firmly stuck to the table. He looked around at the others and gave them a questioning look. He took a few moments and glanced up at the ceiling, trying his best to compose himself, but his thoughts were sprawling from one corner of the room to another end of the universe. Philip had yet to comprehend what was happening, and all he knew was that Andrea had brought him there to the realm and that Beatrice was somewhat mean. She kept talking of pox and other diseases, while discussing why Philip should not be there. Beatrice kept discussing with Andrea why Philip was the wrong person and how Andrea was mistaken for choosing him. All the while, Philip still hadn't yet understood why he was there or even why he was chosen. He only had the reasoning that Andrea announced, which was still remarkably vague. While the words from Andrea were quite comforting, he was still unable to move off the table. How did I get here? I don't remember anything, Philip asked, hoping to finally understand his situation better. His head ached dully with a headache and his mouth felt dry and cottony. It didn't look like any place he had ever seen before. Andrea stepped towards him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You were transported here by a powerful spell, she said softly. Philip felt a chill run down his spine as he processed this information. He had no idea where he was or why he was there. Was he in danger? Would he ever be able to go home? You are here because I brought you here, Philip. I used a pretty powerful spell to sunder your soul from your body in the realm you came from to deposit you here. Andrea paused momentarily as Beatrice stepped to the other side of the room. You see, Philip, you're in a different body. While it will look and function as your other one did, it's different. If there were days that you woke up and your joints felt stiff, they won't now because they're new. They don't have the wear and tear that normal bodies do. Philip's face contorted slightly as he listened to Andrea's explanation. Right, he said slowly, not believing what she was saying. He believed he was dreaming, and he hoped that he would wake up soon. Andrea noticed the look of disbelief on his face and continued to explain. In this realm, you will have access to powerful magic, and you need to learn how to control it properly. Otherwise, you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. I'm here to help guide you through this new life. Beatrice had not been in the forefront of the conversation, but now she stepped closer, her doubt evident. What assurance do we have that we can trust you? She asked directly. Andrea didn't flinch at the question and responded calmly. I understand your concern, Beatrice, she said. But if Phillip is going to survive in this realm, I am his only hope at learning how to control his magic. Beatrice rolled her eyes callously and huffed. We don't even know what kind of magic he can conjure and control, she remarked harshly. And we don't have to yet, replied Andrea confidently. In time, we will deduce what he can and cannot do. Beatrice sighed loudly and shook her head, leaving Andrea to continue her conversation with Phillip. Phillip, you will be given 3 tasks that will help us deduce what magic you can and cannot control, she explained calmly. The first task will be learning how to manipulate the elements which are essential for all spellcasting: air, earth, fire, and water. There is no guarantee that you'll be able to, but the most common casters in this realm can use one of the 4 prime elements. It only makes sense for us to start here. So you want me to play with fire? Asked Phillip. His back was still affixed to the table, but he was allowing his mind to wander. At the moment that Andrea was discussing the elements, Philip's mind began to swirl around his life as Declan Bartholomew. He was thinking back to the games that he played and how he would conjure fire and ice to conquer his enemies. He thought about the friends he made and the challenges he surmounted. Everything seemed too perfect, like the life he wanted to live was finally in his grasp. However, as Andrea spoke, he still had no idea what his fate in Taras would be. He still pondered if he was dreaming, and if he was, he didn't want to wake. However, as Andrea continued to discuss openly the ways to conjure the elements, Phillip blurted out and interrupted her, something that was probably not the wisest of decisions. I get that you want to teach me the ways of this realm, but I think there is something that is a bit more prominent that we need to discuss. Well, 2 things, he said softly. Andrea stepped away from the table with Phillip still firmly stuck to it. Phillip licked his lips and swallowed what little spit was in his mouth. The first thing, is there any way that I'll ever be able to make it home? Andrea shook her head solemnly, knowing that she was delivering a crushing piece of information. I'm sorry, Phillip. Once you're here, there's no going back. The only way is forward. This is your home now. Phillip remained calm as he tried to comprehend her message. His back was on the table, but he still couldn't move. Perhaps we should just get to the second one, he said softly, his lips quivering in sadness. The weight of the news was still heavy, but he took a deep breath and pushed on. How can I move? If this is my new home, I'd at least try to explore it. Andrea's expression softened as she understood the weight of Phillip's question. Movement. It's a simple task, really, even for someone new to this realm. She walked towards him and placed her hand on his chest. All you need to do is focus your energy into your body and think about where you want to go. The rest will come naturally. Phillip bit his bottom lip and exhaled loudly through his nostrils. So, I'm just supposed to will myself to move? Yes, pretty much, she answered contritely. Phillip closed his eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on the feeling of Andrea's hands on his chest. All right, what's the worst thing that happens? I fall flat on my face and you 2 get a good laugh. The 2 women glanced at one another and shrugged as Phillip closed his eyes. He imagined himself standing up and walking towards the window, feeling the cool breeze on his face and the sun on his skin. Slowly, he felt a tingling sensation in his toes, then his feet, and finally his entire body. With his back still firmly on the table, Phillip raised his right leg into the air, followed by the left. I'm moving, he muttered with his eyes still closed. I'm actually moving. The 2 women shared a smile, happy to see that Phillip was able to complete one of the more simple tasks ahead of him. Want to try to walk? Asked Andrea. She removed her hand from his chest and walked over to the small console. If I push this button, the gears will turn and the table will come forward. You won't have long, but you'll be on your feet and you'll need to focus on standing. All right? Phillip composed himself and smiled. He was still moving his feet as Andrea walked over to the console. All right, do it, he commanded softly, ready to be on his feet. Andrea depressed the button and the gears started to shift. However, it was at this moment Andrea was made aware of something unfortunately funny Beatrice accidentally did. The table descended at Phillip's head, causing Phillip to slide backwards, head first, onto the floor. Phillip's eyes burst open as he hit the ground with a thud. The room spun around him as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. A sharp pain shot through his back and he groaned in response. He heard Andrea frantically apologizing while Beatrice laughed hysterically, even though their voices sounded distant and muffled. Phillip tried to lift himself up, but his muscles refused to cooperate. His legs felt heavy and unresponsive, and his arms shook as he tried to push himself off the ground. He had yet to master how to move in this new realm in this new body, and now that he was on the floor, it was going to be a much more difficult struggle. Tears welled up in his eyes as he looked up at the two women. "What did you do?" he croaked out, his voice hoarse with emotions. Andrea knelt beside him, her expression pained. "I'm so sorry, Philip. We didn't mean for that to happen." Philip shook his head, his heart pounding in his chest. Was this just a cruel joke? Beatrice looked away, slightly embarrassed by the events. "I honestly didn't think he'd ever walk, so I didn't pay attention to what end of the table I put him on." Andrea darted her eyes over to Beatrice with scorn. "Look, he's already doing better than what I expected. When he showed up and I saw just how basic he was, I didn't have high hopes, and I may have shortchanged my work. I apologize." Philip composed himself and reached up with his right hand, placing it firmly on his skull. He rubbed it slowly, trying to ease the pain with both Andrea and Beatrice smiling. "Look, he's already moving his extremities," continued Beatrice. "Maybe you were right after all. Maybe he is what we need." Andrea reached underneath Philip's back and brought him up to a seated position with all of his weight on her torso. "He'll be fine, but he's going to have to figure out this body before he can go tackle the elements." Philip looked down at his arms, still shaking with the effort of trying to lift himself up. He couldn't believe that he was now in a new body, one that he had no idea how to control. But, looking up at Andrea and Beatrice, he knew that he had to try. He couldn't let them down, not after all the work they had done to get him here. Taking a deep breath, Philip focused on his fingers, willing them to move. Slowly but surely, he felt himself gaining control over his limbs, first his fingers, then his arms. He stood up, shakily at first, but then with more confidence as he gained more control over his body. Looking up at Andrea and Beatrice, Philip smiled. "I think I'm going to like this new body," he said, surprised at how strong his voice sounded. "Where do we go from here?" Andrea and Beatrice exchanged a look before Andrea spoke up. "Why don't we get you walking and get you fed? You've got a long journey ahead of you and not a lot of time to get acclimated to it." Philip took a deep breath and looked at his fingers. His fingers were long and thin, but strong. They were not the gangly, bloated fingers of the man he once was. He had yet to look at his appearance in a mirror, but just the sight of his hands gave him hope.